罗嘎达瓜拉瓜拉姆的水古今啊瓦吉下，欢迎收看伊达看世界英语论坛。Welcome to the Ida See the World English Forum. I'm Wagi.
I'm Raf, today's co-host.
On November 5th, Donald Trump was elected as the 47th President of the United States, gaining a solid majority in both the House and the Senate. It may feel like the U.S. is turning back the clock to 2016, but this time around, it could be somewhat different.
Through today's ITA Insights special edition, we'll dive into the reaction within the United States and examine how the world is responding to Trump's return. Joining us today are Wen-Ti Song, non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council Global China Hub.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Marcin Jajewski, head of the Taiwan office of the European Values Center for Security Policy.
It's great to be on the show. Thank you for having me today.
Let's set the stage by looking at Trump's last defeat. 4 years ago, he claimed election fraud when Joe Biden won, leading his supporters to storm the Capitol. Contrasted with Kamala Harris's concession speech, where she emphasized the peaceful transition of power.
In the meanwhile, there are ongoing protests in the U.S. against Trump, mostly from women who are afraid that they are going to lose abortion rights and other rights of various minorities, as well as Palestinian protesters that are afraid Trump will support Israel's military campaign in Gaza. So Wen-Ti, what reactions are you seeing in the U.S. right now? And also, what implications does that have to the world?
Well, first and foremost, I think shock is the word that comes to mind. I think this is the first time in a very long time that we're seeing the Republican Party under President Trump's leadership, well, incoming President Trump's leadership, to capture not only the popular vote, electoral college, both houses of Congress, as well as having solid conservative majority in the Supreme Court, for example. So really complete control of all branches of government. So this is definitely something new. For me personally, I think the fact that GOP this time around is able to win a majority in the popular vote, especially, is something that is very, that's not say unprecedented, but something that's very surprising to many observers. Because if we go back to 1992, when Bill Clinton won his presidency for the first time. Ever since 1992, it's been about 32 years. During this 32-year span, the GOP, or the Republican Party, has only won popular vote once in 2004. And that is in the shadow of the Iraq War and September 11th terrorist attack on the US. All those factors had to be there, had to be present for GOP to win popular vote. And that's why also I think that's one major cause for such partisan polarization in the US side, because sometimes it's harder to come to a consensus politically when one side may be winning the presidency on account of the electoral college majority, but struggle to win it nationally. So maybe some people think they won on a technicality. This time around, clear, solid, convincing victory and strong mandate. And with that, what kind of policy is going to come to fruition over the next 4 years? I think many people are watching it attentively at the moment, for sure.
Okay, just as Wendy said, Trump won decisively this time, even flipping the traditionally Democrat blue wall states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And pre-election polls had shown a light edge for Harris. And in this state, but that wasn't the outcome. So marching. So what do you believe drove voters in these states to support Trump, and how this play out across key demographics like Black or Latino voters?
I think that there are two trends that we can look at here. Firstly, there is a question of how we should interpret pre-election polls. You know, there is this concept in social science and the studies of political behavior, the concept of the interviewer effect. I believe that in the United States, Trump is still perceived as a as a wild card, as a controversial candidate, and therefore I believe that some voters, particularly those who are undecided or who identify as political independents, were holding off their decision for whom to cast their votes until the very last moment, and perhaps even thought that voting for Trump would be something undesirable, and therefore Trump was underestimated in the opinion polls. But there's this second issue that we should be looking at, and that's the issue of how Americans in 2024 define what it means to be an American citizen. And I believe that we are seeing a tremendous shift in operationalization of American citizenship from a concept which is more collective, where certain groups, for example, minorities, historically underrepresented peoples in national politics, are stepping away from identity politics, are stepping away from these collective considerations of citizenship, and instead pursue individual citizenship, and therefore find it appealing what Trump is promising. So, for example, prosperity at individual level, sometimes at the cost of protection of collective rights of groups such as migrants.
So the public is the economy.
Yeah.
So,
Wendy, wanted to turn to you, as you are an Asian person. You have spent time in the United States. What's interesting is that Trump actually gained with Asian minority vote this time. What's behind this?
I think quite a number of factors must have gone into effect here. I mean, for Asian voters, obviously, I think for them, they'll be concerned about socio-economic upward mobility. We know from the last couple of years, for example, there was a famous lawsuit in the US. I forgot the exact name of the lawsuit, but basically Asian students for fair admission into Harvard. When you see Asian parents as well as their children who try to get into top flight Ivy League or Ivy League caliber university in the US, suing these universities because they think that the current DEI or affirmative action-oriented policies, they believe those benefit primarily African-American, Latino voters, Native American voters, students, for example, and that somehow Asian parents feel like that disadvantages Asian students when he tries to get into access into top universities. So I think that example tells us one thing, and that is as Asian American voters climb the social economic ladder upward, their voting pattern become more and more like the standard typical Caucasian American voter that we've come to know. And we know that historically Caucasian American voters tend to vote for the Republican Party at higher percentage than do the Democrats. So I think that trend, economic-driven change in voting behavior, work for Caucasian American voters, and increasingly are also leading Asian American voters to shift rightward as well and vote for Trump and Republican Party.
So Wendy, you talked about the shift from the minority-heavy Democratic Party, with Asians now vote more towards the Republican Party. And what are your thoughts in terms of what resonated with voters across the country?
I think economic factors definitely concern. We mentioned about how Asian American voters now increasingly shift rightward as their socioeconomic status improves over time. Indeed, we used to talk about Asian American voters as the so-called model minorities, and the more model-y they become in economic terms, the more almost white American-y they become also in voting behavior.
So that comes to what should the Democrats do differently?
For sure, yes, and it's what they say about the Republican Party this time around. They said this is the most ethnically, racially diverse GOP coalition that we've seen in over a generation, for sure, and that's why also the Democratic Party historically calls itself as a rainbow coalition, that is an electoral coalition made up of all races, especially ethnic minorities. This time around, they seem to be losing ground for sure among Latino voters, Black voters, Asian American voters. A lot of things remain to be done for Democrats. One thing for them to consider perhaps is to reconsider ways to reframe the electoral appeal beyond cultural war terms and talk more about how they can more concretely improve the economic lot of those blue-collar voters, both white, Black, Asian American, Latino, and others, such that their economic policies, subsidies, and what have you will be more means-tested in nature rather than having very clear-cut, color-oriented quota systems.
Okay, let's turn to Europe's response to Trump's win. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz have already had discussions on this new era. So, Martin, what reactions can we expect from Europe, and what concerns are likely top of the mind for European leaders?
In the context of transatlantic relations, one of the most important formats that might be affected by the Trump 2.0 presidency is NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And Trump has been very unequivocal in requiring European states to pull more weight in burden sharing when it comes to fostering collective security within NATO. And this is actually not a new request from Trump. He's been quite vocal about it during his first presidency, for example, infamously sending a very strongly worded letter to German Chancellor Angela Merkel in 2018, saying that he thought other European countries were not living up to the standard of spending at least 2% of their gross domestic product on defense because Germany was not doing so. Times have changed, and this 2% threshold has been met by a higher number of countries in light of the full-scale Russian invasion in Ukraine. At the same time, Trump will definitely take a more transactional approach to fostering collective security, and therefore we are expecting changes to the degree of American commitment to NATO. So what is the European response? Europe needs to spend when it comes to our security and defense.
Yeah, so a question. So does the EU trust the US with the Donald Trump in office? What do you think?
The response from top EU-level officials, including European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, was quite positive. In her statement released shortly after the election results came in, she emphasized particularly the economic dimension of transatlantic relations, highlighting that billions of dollars and millions of jobs depend on the health of the transatlantic relationship. And I believe that it will be of utmost importance to sustain the positive relationship between partners on both sides of the Atlantic. However, particularly in Western EU member states, policy making is often negatively affected by a sense of anti-Americanism. So lawmakers in these jurisdictions really want to push forward the idea that European policymaking and implementation should be more independent from the United States. So I believe that responses might be a little different from EU member states in Western Europe and EU member states in Eastern Europe.
Another serious question. In your perspective, will Ukraine be forced to negotiate with Russia? What do you think?
I think that a lot will depend on the people that Trump will surround himself with when designating who will be in charge of the State Department and especially the DOD. We have some indications about who is going to get which positions, but a lot remains to be seen. At the end of the day, I believe that it is of utmost interest for Trump to end the protracted conflict in Ukraine as soon as possible. So Trump will seek ways to end the conflict soon, perhaps at the expense of territorial losses in Ukraine. People that Trump likes to surround himself with believe that Asia should come first, that the US should put more of its scarce resources in the Indo-Pacific theater amid the US-China competition. And that's why I think that it will be a new priority to end the conflict in Ukraine, even if the cost is really high.
Speaking of China, on the day before the US elections, China's President Xi Jinping inspected troops and highlighted the importance of military preparedness. He also sent a congratulatory message to Trump, noting that cooperation between the US and China benefits both nations. Trump started the ongoing trade war between the US and China, with Biden doubling down on those efforts. Wen-Ti, what would you expect from Trump when it comes to China and his second administration?
I think unpredictability is sort of go-to word for many analysts, and it's a go-to word for a good reason. I think Trump likes to keep everybody on their toes. He tried to project a certain image of he's going to do things differently and that there's no way you can really predict his next move, and that's how he can maximum leverage out of you. We see this tendency playing out back in the Cold War as well, when President Nixon at the time talked about the idea of madman theory, which is that he will try to always surprise you. He will try to even entertain options that you will think unthinkable, just so that you will lead his adversaries and rivals to think in a way that's more like worst-case scenario thinking. And when they're thinking worst-case scenario, then they're more likely to cut you some slack, perhaps give you some olive branches here and there as a way to placate you, because who want to deal with a crazy person, right? So I think in many ways, that's how President Trump goes about negotiating. It's proven to be effective to some extent during his first term in terms of getting some allies, friends, and partners to really increase their own defense budget expenditures by threatening that U.S. will stop providing a certain level of security umbrella that U.S. might have done for years and allies and partners might have gotten used to. However, it remains to be seen whether the trick that worked once before, whether it will continue to work for years to come. And if they don't work on partners and allies this time around, that's going to have important implications for U.S. when it comes to China policy, because we know that having more friends, higher quality allies and partners is one major reason why U.S. has been able to approach China from the position of strength when you have numbers on your side.
From what you're hearing, do you feel that with these allies and partners, or with Trump's unpredictability, will it raise tensions given that Taiwan is right next to China?
So you mean tension with China, with other friends and partners?
The U.S. and China.
Right. So one can imagine that in the short term, some level of increasing tension is probably the more likely result. Trump, when he's starting out his new presidency, chances are he's going to try to find ways to problematize the previously unproblematic issues. That's how he creates new issues, new cleavage points that he can then use as a bargaining chip to get China to give him concessions on. So I think short-term tension increase between U.S.-China is a likely scenario. Looking into medium or longer term, though, again, I think this goes to what Martin said earlier, which is personnel matters, who is going to be running his policy on a daily basis. And also, it remains to be seen that who, the doves or the hawks in Trump's administration, who is going to have Trump's ears more. We know some elements in his cabinet are going to be those who come from more of a business background, perhaps with major investments, factories and what have you in China. And there'll be others who will be more like Asia firsters in grand strategy terms. So this balance of attention, if you will, between the hawks and the doves in the Trump administration is going to decide whether longer term you will see a more stable or more tension-ridden U.S.-China ties.
Okay, after China's issues, let's focus on Taiwan's. In Taiwan, President Lai Ching-te congratulated Trump after he crossed the 270 Electoral College threshold. Trump's rhetoric before the election accused Taiwan of stealing the chip business from the U.S. As Taiwan now the global leader in semiconductors, it's a very serious claim. So Martin, how can Taiwan enhance its cooperation with the EU and other international allies with this uncertainty?
I believe that Taiwan has already taken the right steps to enhance its relationship with the European Union. One of the concerns that the European Union has had in the context of its economic relations with Taiwan was that collectively the 27 EU member states make up the largest foreign investor in Taiwan. At the same time, the total volume of outward investment going out of Taiwan to the EU was more limited. However, recently we have seen some really big ticket investments from Taiwan to the European Union. For example, Prologium investing in a very advanced EV battery factory in the north of France, and of course TSMC building its first European plant in Dresden, Germany. Particularly, the TSMC investment will have positive spillover effects for the Czech Republic and potentially also Poland. So this is the right direction. Additionally, the European Union has voiced its concerns about market access for European companies in the offshore wind sector in Taiwan, and also protectionism by the Taiwanese government in terms of access for agricultural products. Recently, the Directorate General of Trade of the European Commission has announced that an agreement has been reached between Taiwan and the European Union in terms of market access for wind energy. However, the question of protectionism in agriculture is one that has yet to be resolved. So, in short, in an era of geopolitical uncertainty, Taiwan has already proven itself to be a reliable, like-minded partner when it comes to shared values. Now, Taiwan needs to show that it is really a reliable partner, also in terms of free market economy.
So it's good to hear that the cooperation between Taiwan and the UN are getting closer.
Absolutely, and it's important for the Lai administration to continue down the right path.
Turning to the US-China rivalry, Wen-Ti mentioned earlier that it's likely to intensify under the second Trump administration, especially in the short term. And also, the Taiwan Strait is likely to come in the spotlight. So shifting to Taiwan's domestic issues, the government's budget here must be reviewed and approved by the Legislative Yuan, which is Taiwan's national legislature. However, the opposition parties now have a majority. Wen-Ti, would this become Taiwan's largest issue or obstacle to overcome, given that Trump has mentioned how important it is for Taiwan and other US allies and partners to beef up defense?
I think defense budget is definitely going to be something that people are going to be watching out for the next few years to come. We know that when you are running a government in Taiwan, it's never going to be the easiest thing to do to get opposition onto your side when it comes to budget time. However, I think we can only be optimistic that politics will somehow stop at the water's edge at the end of the day, and that they will be able to form in a consensus across party line inside Taiwan when it comes to increasing Taiwan's defense budget responsibly. Of course, I think Taiwan has been doing a lot of right things when it comes to defense. We know there's been significant qualitative differences in terms of changing defense reforms, military training structure and regime, for example. We know that Taiwan has been trying to find ways to build defense and security cooperation partnerships with other partners and friends internationally, as well as a way to leverage resources from and pool risk with other like-minded friends and partners internationally. I think this also has an economic dimension as well. We know TSMC and a number of other major Taiwanese economic champions have been slowly establishing their presence in other countries as well, as a way to not only expand potential market for Taiwan's companies, but also as a way for them to, I think, have a more on-the-ground presence with local societies. So that's one way in which you can see economic exchanges and trade relations begin to have a diplomatic dimension as well in terms of cultivating supporters in foreign countries, and that in turn help Taiwan diplomacy longer term.
Well, when it comes to defense, particularly defense, given that the US will likely ask Taiwan to pay up, or as Marcin mentioned, to spend, do you feel that Taiwan can achieve that, given the current composture of the legislature?
I think it's definitely within the realm of possibility. Exact percentage, as a share defense budget, as a share of GDP or government budget, I think that remains to be debated and negotiated between Taiwan and its various international friends, as well as internally inside Taiwan. However, I think Taiwan has done a good job in terms of incrementally increasing its defense budget, so that at least it's sending the right signal to other friends internationally, because we know that we help those who help themselves, and Taiwan has definitely been showing that Taiwan is trying what it can to help itself, so that other friends internationally will have talking points to their own domestic population and say, hey, we're helping out Taiwan, Taiwan's being a good friend, and Taiwan is doing what it can as well. And therefore, when we help them, it's going to be meaningful assistance rather than cultivating free riding or dependency.
So this includes America's Donald Trump?
I think this will include a huge segment of American society, and specific personalities, specific process and policy, percentage term, these things remain up for negotiation, I believe.
Now let's take a quick break. We'll be back to discuss new appointments in the next U.S. administration and what it could mean for Taiwan and the world. Welcome to 一大看世界英语论坛，我是瓦叶。 This November, the political landscape in the United States has shifted dramatically, with Donald Trump's return as the 47th president.
Through this segment of ITA Insights, we'll take a closer look at his announced key cabinet members and what they might indicate for America's future policies at home and abroad. How might Donald Trump's latest picks reshape U.S. foreign policy, especially when it comes to Taiwan and China?
Joining us today are German Lallery, also known as G-Man, retired U.S. Air Force Foreign Area Officer.
Hi, my name is Germont Lallery. I'm a retired Air Force officer. I'm currently a visiting scholar at the Institute for National Defense and Research, and thank you for having me on this show.
Also, Roger Liu, National Sun Yat-sen University International Master's Program in Asia-Pacific Affairs Assistant Professor.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here.
So let's kick things off by discussing Trump's likely cabinet members. And after criticism of his previous administration's choices, he's been very selective this time around.
Let's first take a look at some of the key cabinet members that the Trump transition team has announced so far. You can see some key positions such as longtime supporter of Taiwan, Senator Marco Rubio for Secretary of State, Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense, Susie Wiles as Chief of Staff, John Radcliffe as a CIA Director, and many more as seen on the list here. G-Man, what do we know from these picks that Trump has announced so far? What would it mean for a Trump 2.0 administration?
Well, first of all, I think it's pretty great that his team was able to announce all these candidates a few days after he won the election. So that means that they've been preparing for this time ahead of time. And it also means that they checked these people out for what they bring to the table. So it wasn't like there was a sudden scurry of people and then they decided. No, they already decided. And I think, to me, one of the important people that should be mentioned is Mike Waltz, who is the nominee for the National Security Advisor. And the National Security Advisor, as you know, is very important. We have Jake Sullivan, who's the current National Security Advisor, so this guy is very important. Now, why is he important? Well, first of all, he's a colonel in the U.S. Army. He's a Green Beret. He was the first Green Beret ever elected to Congress. He's written a few books, and he served in Afghanistan, and he has 4 Bronze Stars with 2 for valor. And he's done a lot of great things. He's on the House China Task Force. He's on the Armed Services Committee. He's on the Intelligence Committee. So this guy brings a lot to the table. And so he's going to be President-elect Trump's National Security Advisor.
Trump was vocal about his dissatisfaction with his former administration, claiming he used the wrong people. And Roger, so do you believe these individuals are a better fit?
Well, I think when Donald Trump is choosing his administrators, I think he has a logic behind that. Because he wants someone first who are loyal to him, so we can see that, well, he has been choosing a bunch of loyalists who has not criticized him too much during the campaign. And he wants to choose someone who can get his plan done. Well, what he has been focusing upon is American First, that we maybe we'll be talking about this later in details. But what Donald Trump is trying to do is to bring America to the center stage of the United States, to the center stage of international politics. So how to reinforce the U.S. National capacity will be important. So the choosing of the personnel actually is a reflection of that.
You just particularly mentioned the loyalty. Why the criteria is so important for Trump?
Well, I think loyalty is important for each and every U.S. president because, especially for Trump, that's important because he, for the future, I think we will see a more conflictual domestic politics of the U.S. because what Donald Trump has been focusing upon is to kind of correct the ideology from being too left in the United States, especially in the domestic politics. He might take what people have been mentioned, the Project 2025, which is a plan to kind of bring America to the center in ideological wise, because a lot of, especially the Republican supporters, they thought that for the past few years under the rule of the Democratic Party, America has turned left too much, focusing on a lot of issues, especially the gender issues or the minority issues, and they think it's time to bring things back with a focus of economic and nation building.
So now let's talk about the policy. So from immigration to trade, Trump's policies have consistently leaned toward protectionism. And with this new cabinet, can we expect a return to American first policies, possibly even more stronger than before? And I also want to ask Roger, so how do you see this shaping U.S. domestic and foreign policy, especially here in the region, I mean in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, American First is what Donald Trump is going to do if you will. Actually, he established American First Policy Institute. What is under American First is he is going to reinforce the manufacturing sector especially. So what the U.S. had been outsourcing before, such as semiconductor or the ICT sectors, or even the automobile industry, he is trying to bring this back and have all the manufacturing capacity to be located back in the U.S. So that's important. And secondly, the way that he's going to do that compared with the Democratic administration is that we will see more sticks than carrots. So before, when Joe Biden was still in his position, he used the subsidies trying to attract more foreign investments, such as TSMC or Samsung, to set up their fabs in the U.S. But now Donald Trump, he might want to rely on tariffs a little bit more than the subsidies. So by raising the tariffs, he is trying to force the foreign big tech firms to come back to the U.S. to manufacturing chips over there. And the third thing is that he is going to curb China. So that's important, that to make sure that U.S. stay ahead of China on some emerging technologies as the front, such as AI, such as semiconductor, and other emerging technologies. So I think this is something that he's going to do.
So does Trump really believe that a tariff strategy will make America great again?
Well, he mentioned that tariff actually is a beautiful word. So I think he firmly believes that. He believes in the Reaganite kind of economic theory. So I think he's going to do that. But, well, tariff actually is a double-edged sword. So if you raise the tariffs, and you will also cause inflation within the U.S. society, and this is something that I think he and the American government has to consider.
Let's now talk about one of the most anticipated areas of change, as Roger mentioned, ties with the U.S. and China, and Trump's been consistently assertive on China, as we've seen throughout the years from his first presidency. And this time around, he's made it clear that he intends to address the trade deficit, competition in sectors like technology and manufacturing. G-Man, given Trump's talk on China, and he's also had Marco Rubio on as his nominated, or who he will nominate as Secretary of State. What does this indicate of his China policy, or how does this reflect on Asian security, especially when it comes to Taiwan?
Well, first of all, when President Obama talked about shifting to Asia, that's what it was just talk. When President Trump came on board, it was a real strong shift towards Asia, and he implemented many things that eventually the Biden administration continued. So what we'll see is a Trump administration with a very strong sense of what the China threat is, as opposed to competitor, which is the terms that the Biden administration used. This will be looked at through the eyes of a security challenge. And so what we'll see is an expectation that the countries that the U.S. is allied with, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, Australia, etc., Singapore, Thailand, these countries will have the expectation that they're going to take a stronger role in their own defense. And with that expectation, then the U.S. will commit itself to help those countries build up their defense. So the new Trump administration has some very strong people. You mentioned Senator Rubio, who's selected to be the next Secretary of State. He has very strong opinions about China, and I think the whole administration is in the same direction as President Trump. So therefore, I think that China should be worried about the Trump administration. It's not going to be what we call in America kumbaya anymore. It's going to be serious, and they're going to have to deal with a more assertive America and asserting its role as the lead in the democratic world.
But with this assertiveness, does it also make Taiwan safer?
I think so, because the U.S. will expect, as I mentioned, all those countries to invest more in its defense. And the investment is not just money and weapon systems. There's going to be an expectation that the entire ROC military, including the reserves, need to be brought up to combat readiness. And many people think that they can, quote unquote, buy off Trump by buying weapons, and that will satisfy him. No, it's about the total lethality of your military. If you just have lots of weapons and you don't have enough people to fight, it doesn't help your lethality. So there are almost 2 million reservists that have very little training in Taiwan. They need to be trained. And until they're trained, I think America will be putting a lot of pressure on the Lai government to get those people trained up.
And the U.S. will provide support with that training, along with pressure.
Right. So it takes two to tango. So if the Lai administration and the government, including the KMT and the TPP, work together to make the ROC military more lethal, then the U.S. will help. If there's pushback, then the question is Taiwan serious about its own defense? Because as in Ukraine, once the Ukrainians showed that they were serious about their own self-defense, not only did the Americans, but the NATO countries and many other countries provided them support. So Taiwan needs to show that it's serious about it. And I think the Europeans are going to be a little scared about Trump because he was the one who told them 6 years before Russia's invasion to increase their defense budget. And they were wrong, they didn't do it, and now they're suffering because they didn't make that investment.
And what's your, opinion about Trump said that Taiwan should pay protection fee to the U.S.?
I think it sets the tone for putting Taiwan on notice that it needs to get serious about its defense. Mm-hmm. Spending 2.5% of your GDP next door to an aggressive totalitarian regime like China is insufficient. Poland is going to increase its defense budget by up to 5%. Mm-hmm. Israel has had its defense budget at 5% for the last 45 years. The Taiwanese government only the last couple of years went above 2%. And so it's about investing for your defense, to maintain your democracy. If you're not serious about it, then you're not serious about it, and then you probably will reap the problems that will occur with a totalitarian regime next door to you.
So let's turn back to the economy issues. Given Trump's protectionist agenda and the focus on reshoring manufacturing, and Taiwan's high-tech industry, particularly in semiconductors manufacturing might face significant pressure. And I just want to ask Roger, so what strategies should Taiwan's tech sector to adopt to respond to potential restrictions or demands from the U.S.? What do you think?
Well, U.S. has been talking about out of China for a long time. So that actually provides some opportunity for the Taiwan tech manufacturers to look for to relocate their markets. But we have to notice at the same time they're also talking about out of Taiwan as well, because especially the U.S. government, they still come with some concerns and worries that once the war takes place between Taiwan and China, the whole supply chain, the global supply chain in semiconductors will be interrupted. So they are trying to not put every eggs in one basket. So Taiwan has been facing, just like you have mentioned, the pressure from the U.S. government to relocate its fabs to other places, especially TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. So now they have already begun some foreign project. First is in Kumamoto, Japan. So Fab 23 is being established there and running well. And the second one is in Dresden, Germany, and the third one is in Arizona, the United States. I think what Taiwan concerns about is that the TSMC especially wants to keep its core technology and competitiveness inside of Taiwan. So they have started the next generation of semiconductors manufacturing and located in Kaohsiung, the 2-nanometer one, the process. But they are going to relocate some of its capacity to Arizona, the US as well, because the United States government will ask TSMC to do so. Well, that sounds easy, but there are a lot of challenges that it has to be done. First is the working culture and the labor conditions. They are different. So we have been reading a lot of reports from the United States that labor rights have been violated, and some people, workers, engineers are going to sue TSMC for that. The second thing is that there is a global lack of talents for engineers. So everybody is looking for qualified engineers in the manufacturing of semiconductors in Germany, in Japan, in the United States especially. So how to overcome this, I think that will not only be a lesson or a problem or an issue for Taiwan, also for the United States as well. So I think this is something that the US and Taiwan should work together.
So I have a very interesting question. Is it possible that TSMC will become ASMC?
ASMC, like American, yeah. Well, actually, in Europe, their name is ESMC, the European Semiconductor Corporation. Yeah. So ASMC, yes, it's part of the country, but they have like 20 plus fabs in Taiwan and other places. So I think they are confident that only by relocating some of the fabs outside of the country, it won't actually damage the core competitiveness of TSMC.
Let's go back to security. With Trump's re-election likely heightening U.S.-China tensions, as G-Man put it, that Trump and his administration see it more in terms of the lens of a threat as to what the current administration in Biden sees it as a competitor. Taiwan's military preparedness will be crucial in maintaining security and stability here and in the region. G-Man, what steps do you think Taiwan needs to deal with this new renewed tensions and also heightening threat that we see from across the strait every day?
Well, let's be clear. It's China that's doing the increased threat, and there's no reason for it other than the fact that they're being more aggressive. So let's not blame Taiwan or the United States for China's aggression, number one. Number two, I just wanted to make a side note on the TSMC point. One thing to realize is it's not just the Americans pressuring TSMC, it's also TSMC diversifying their fabs around the world in case there's a problem. It's not just an American issue, it's a TSMC issue. But getting back to the security, I think that one of the important things that have to happen is you have to, as President Lai has set up, a whole society defense committee. It is the whole society. And the government needs to take more responsibility in informing the people of Taiwan what is going on. And so it's important that the government is more transparent. And from my perspective, they've become actually less transparent. And so I would offer that the government has to first explain to the people what's happening. Second, they have to also provide the education and the tools for the people of Taiwan to deal with a potential conflict. And so there are a lot of NGOs that are providing this training, but the government hasn't really taken any responsibility in this area. And again, I think this has to happen quickly. And then the third part is the reservists I mentioned earlier. Currently, only 8,000 reservists a year get the 2-week training. And the other 50,000 a year get the 1-week training. So with 2 million people available for reserve duty, that's severely insufficient. So all these things have to be taken care of.
And in terms of aligning closer to the U.S., given that, as you said, the threat is from China and that it's rising, what do you think specifically Taiwan needs to do to align more with the incoming administration to make sure that U.S. allies are ready for this or whatever that is coming?
I think that they need to demonstrate that they are serious, and all the political infighting in Taiwan needs to stop. And everyone needs to go in the same direction, which is maintaining Taiwan's current status of being a democracy. And it should not be undercut by any of the political parties. And everyone needs to be thinking about keeping Taiwan the way it is. And so by investing more in the training of lots of people and in lots of weapon systems, both conventional and asymmetric, I don't believe in, like I mentioned before, I don't believe in the easy button of buying more weapons and then that's going to satisfy Trump. Taiwan needs to think about its own survival, whether or not the United States is going to help or not. Israel doesn't depend on the United States to survive. And the people around Israel want to kill all the people in Israel. So Taiwan needs to think about what it takes to survive itself. And then the U.S. will respect it when it's fully implemented. So the U.S. will help Taiwan, and the U.S. and Taiwan needs to help itself.
So the same question for Roger. So the same question on Taiwan's security issues. So what's your opinions on this subject?
Well, I agree with G-Man that Taiwan have to increase its capacity not only in the defense, but also the willingness is very important. The people of Taiwan should understand that only by helping themselves, the United States will come for help. But we do need the support from the U.S. eagerly, especially, well, Taiwan has been prevented from getting advanced weapons like F-35s or advanced weapons that we can use to counter the attack from China, which has been promoting their military capacities for the past few decades. China is not like China 30 years before, compared with what they have now. So the support from the U.S. is actually very important. Not only the government, but also the people of Taiwan are expecting the U.S. to voice clearly that they are going to support Taiwan when Taiwan is under attack from China.
You wanted to add something in terms of the defense.
Yeah, I think that one community specifically in Taiwan is a good example of a people who take the defense of Taiwan seriously. The indigenous people of Taiwan are highly representative in the military compared to their actual population, and then specifically in special forces is incredibly high. So I think the indigenous people have a lot to offer Taiwan.
I think we will have more discussion on this topic.
Good.
Okay. That wraps up today's IDA Insights. The next 4 years under Trump's leadership remains to be seen when it comes to what changes it will bring to Taiwan and the world. Thanks for watching. I'm Wagi.
I'm Brath.
We'll see you next week on IDA Sila World.